Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group, with Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters.
Hello, Phil. I've been out in the real world this week.
You've been playing around with cars this week, I've seen. Yeah, I mean, it's nice for somebody to get out and about, innit, and just go and drive cars for a day, isn't it?
In the sunshine at Millbrook Proving Grounds.
Yeah. No, it's hard for some, isn't it? I believe,
Were you not there, Phil? I mean, I did look out for you.
Yeah, I just got to see all your social posts and stuff, playing around on trains and driving cars, and the confirmation was that you're over 25. Is what I saw from your day pass.
Yeah, hard to believe. I know.
Does that mean did that give you access to certain cars that under 25s weren't allowed to drive?
Under 25s weren't allowed to drive anything, which amused me because, give you a bit of background on this. This is the SMMT test day, which they hold every year at the Millbrook Proving Ground in Bedfordshire, which is this massive self-contained facility. It's acres upon acres. There's a hill route there, which all the manufacturers use over the course of the year for test driving new cars, prototypes and all that. And it's this day, it's only open to journalists, but going around, there were a lot of influencers. And you say about being over 25. Well, you had to be over 25 to drive any cars. And some of these influencers looked very, very young, but they were going around with sort of selfie sticks and cameras. So I think they were sort of looking more than driving. But I mean, it was an amazing day. I haven't been for several years, but there's over 30 manufacturers there, hundreds of cars, and I would say the bulk of the cars there available for driving were EVs, which for me was absolutely perfect because I was able to catch up on all the cars that I've kind of missed over recent years. So I just concentrated on EVs.
I would say not missed over recent years. I mean, a lot of the stuff you're probably seeing weren't even on the radar over recent years. They probably, some of that stuff is probably just only arriving now, and intent to drive now.
And indeed, some of the brands, including Genesis, so I drove one of their cars, and BYD. I met the team from BYD and drove their Atto 3 design, which was extraordinary. I mean, it's a really seriously good car. And what impressed me was the fit and finish inside. So, it is a Chinese-built, manufactured car, and the interior is actually really, really good.
Yeah, I've seen some reports on that one. I mean, it's not the cheapest of small crossover EVs, but it still fits a reasonable. I think it's 35 upwards, is it, or something? I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's a reasonable mid-size crossover SUV kind of vehicle, isn't it? But from all accounts, the reports I've seen have been very good on it.
It's also got a laptop size screen.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah,
car reviewers have been sort of Marmite on that one because you can do it from portrait to landscape whilst you're moving along as well. So you can put it in the sat nav mode, and then you can press a button on, I think, on the steering wheel, and the screen will turn from landscape to portrait or back again. So
I was playing with all the buttons, but I didn't find that one.
Did you not?
I didn't know.
I missed that one. Oh, okay. So I mean, fantastic. I'm glad somebody's got time to go up now, but it is great, and we are talking a little bit because one of the
I was representing the podcast there, so
it's we had one of the stories this week has come out of that day down at Millbrook there, but. This week on the show, we've got the pleasure again of being joined by eBay Motors Group's Chief Operating Officer for an exclusive sneak preview of May's Market View analysis of the used car trends in the retailing sector. So stay tuned and you'll hear a sort of a 10-minute interview there with Phill Jones from eBay Motors sharing some of the key stats around the latest in terms of the May's Market View.
And also on this show, we'll have an extract from our extended chat with CAP HPI's Derren Martin. He's the head of director of valuations there. And he'll be talking about May's pricing trends. So do stay tuned for that. That will be in the second half of this particular show.
Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group.
So headlines this week are from Motor Trader, AM, the Financial Times, the Times, and the BBC. Dealers see surge in profits in Motor Trader Top 200 report. Buyer incentives are vital for UK to reach EV target, says SMMT. Tesla to open its fast charging stations to Ford drivers. And finally, you wait for news of a gigafactory to open in the UK, and suddenly two hopefuls come along in the same week.
Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group.
First up on this week's show, we have an exclusive preview of eBay Motor Group's market view for May. And we're delighted to welcome back to the show Chief Operating Officer and friend of the show, Phill Jones, to talk us through it. So welcome back to the podcast, Phill. Great to have you with us.
Hi, chaps. Yep, great to be here. Great to have the sun shining outside as well.
Yeah, looking forward to a long bank holiday weekend, I suspect, Phil.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, to start off with, we as listeners will know, we cover the market view every month on the podcast, and it provides the listeners a useful barometer of how the retail side of the used car market is performing in terms of prices, dealer stock levels, and days to sell. So, can we start off with stock levels that I believe in terms of 51 units and from 54 in the month of April, and are they still under pressure? And what is the data showing you this month?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, sort of with fear of sounding like a broken record, stock continues to be the challenge. I mean, I think we're in a period of some sort of relative stability in the market, but that relative stability unfortunately still means that stock volumes are under pressure. So, yeah, we saw a 5% decrease in the average stock volume across the site, but that's mainly felt by franchise dealers and then car supermarkets. It really does seem to be franchise dealers who are taking the pain on this, and yeah, I worry about it actually a little bit, because we're now at a lowest point. I was looking at it, the lowest point of sort of stock volume per dealer since like July last year, and so stock volumes tend to decline month on month as we go into the summer now. So I'm a bit worried I'm going to be saying the same thing next month as well.
And Phill, within that, you've spotted some specific EV stocking trends, and staying with franchise dealers, because they are noticeably stocking fewer EV units month on month, and they're taking longer to sell. So, what's your thoughts on what's driving that?
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? Because obviously, EVs are in the ascendancy. There's more being registered than ever before, but the used car market, has still not settled from kind of the shake-up early or late last year, really. So, and you can see dealers trying to avoid this space. As feedback we get from some of our customers that they're worried about getting burnt in that space. So, electric volume. Used volume, I should say, was down 10% month on month, May versus April. And I can tell you why, because when we look at days to sell, EVs are noticeably taking longer to sell than other fuel types. So it was 51 days to sell an EV, a used EV in May. That compared to pretty much 35 for all the other fuel types. So it's clearly quite tricky. Consumer awareness of the price drops is still quite high. I just don't think that's kind of necessarily settled, which, is sort of a shame, because, it is a sector you'd expect to broadly be in the ascendancy.
That's an interesting dynamic, isn't it? Because if they're taking longer to sell, then dealers will be reluctant to replace them in stock. So are you actually hearing of any pressure within the franchise dealer sector to take on more EV stock at the moment?
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a kind of recurring theme of speaking to the marketing departments who have effectively been giving the challenge of solving the EV problems. I mean, it's all very complicated in terms of the manufacturer allocations. I guess people have started to get previous kind of EVs back on PCPs and the such like. But it feels like it's definitely being a challenge that's being given to the marketing departments to try and solve. And frankly, their feedback is these are quite expensive cars, and especially in EV, you're often competing with a new car, particularly if you're buying on monthly payments and the such like. So used hasn't got the same kind of clear advantages that it does in kind of traditional fuel types. So yeah, it's a bit of a quandary, I think.
There's a lot to play out, isn't there?
There is. I think I can feel us talking about this one quite a bit now for the future, Curtis, can't you, on the podcast? I think the whole EV story is going to play out. I mean, Phill, just returning to the days to sell and thinking about obviously the performance, days to sell is one of the barometers around supply and demand within the market. How is that looking across the sort of different sectors for this month?
Yeah, broadly, I think dealers have had a slightly better May in terms of days to sell. So yeah, our data is sort of flashing, because we sort of run this kind of relatively, we can't run it at the end of the month because we're sort of trying to get a prediction for the month. But it looks like all segments are selling cars faster. So an average is sort of 3 days decline. So it's 39 days to sell, 36 days this month, and that's an improvement across the board, across supermarket, across franchise, and independent. And again, I'd sort of say it's the franchise who sort of seems to be selling them faster, but again, those are the ones who are feeling the stock pressure, and supermarkets sometimes go hand in hand. The independents have got a bit more stability, I think.
And the third criteria that you measure every month is average prices. So how did average prices perform across the platform in May?
Yeah, do you know what? I could talk for hours about prices, or I could just say, do you know what? I think it's pretty flat. Every way we sort of look at the numbers, it looks pretty flat, and I think we'd all take that in terms of that stability. Just saw Cap sort of saying about a sort of a 1% sort of decline, and if I look at kind of that sort of 2 to 5 year old car, that's down about 0.6%. I mean, there's kind of nothing in it really. Everything is kind of plus or minus kind of 1% of flat. So it's relative stability. I think what's quite interesting is that you obviously get lots of movements within that. So you can kind of see different sort of sub segments kind of appearing. So interestingly, one random one for you, 5 of the top 10 fastest selling cars on our site were Vauxhalls last month. So there's these sort of little niches that's still going there. The one thing that does come out in almost all of this in terms of days to sell, even price, even kind of demand, petrol seems to be the thing that sort of dominates our charts at the moment, which I guess is a fairly controversial thing to say in this day and age.
It's very old school.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I think this is. I mean, what you're just saying there, I think gives a reason that everybody needs to have a look at the market view report, because like you say, there's a lot of devil in the detail, as we always say with Derren about the figures. The minus 1.2% that you referred to there really doesn't tell the story that what's going on in the market. It's such a complex marketplace and very diverse marketplace. But I think, moving away from figures for a minute, what is the talk of the dealers at the minute? What are your customers telling you? What's the feeling out there in the market in terms of the performance, reflecting on some of that supply and demand and activity that's taking place?
Yeah, so aside from kind of the quandary on used EVs, I think it's sort of relative stability. Really, I think people are still feeling pinched by the lack of cars, but it is relative stability. It's definitely not cold out there, but it's definitely not hot, right? In terms of consumer demand, so it's relatively stable. We saw some slight improvements in conversion to lead. in the last month or so. So it's kind of okay. But again, it's been a weird time with extra bank holidays and all that sort of stuff. But I think it's probably about as stable as it's been in a while, and that's not particularly revealing, really. But I guess we'll all take that in this day and age.
Well, Phill, many thanks for joining us and sharing this sneak preview of just some of the insights from the latest market view ahead of its publication. So the full report is, of course, much more detailed, and listeners will be able to find it on the eBay Motors Group website from the middle of next week. So great to talk to you, great to catch up with you, and we do look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Brilliant, thanks, gents.
Thanks, Phill. See you soon. So, I mean, as always, great interview there with Phill Jones, and I mean, it's quite interesting because without spoiling our chat with Derren Martin from Cap HPI, the data that's now starting to come out from eBay Motors is the devil is in the detail now. There's a lot happening, isn't it? Because he's talking about Vauxhalls there being in the tops,
yeah.
and there's a lot going on now, and particularly some of that. The data and performance around battery electric vehicles in that used classified space.
Yeah, I mean, I thought what he was saying about EVs and stocking trends in franchise dealerships was particularly interesting, and you can sense some of the pressures and some of the market dynamics that are going on behind the scenes now with used EVs.
Yeah, exactly. So again, it's great. So it's great to get Phill on, and I know we had Lucy on last time, sharing these updates. But again, reiterating, although we do share it in that interview, that do head over when it's available at the eBay Motors website there and check out all the detail, because it is a very detailed report, as we say every time, and just gives you sort of a market-wide view of what's happening, what consumers are doing, what other retailers are seeing, the data, etc. So do check out the full report when it becomes available.
And first story this week is from Motor Trader, and the headline there is "Dealers See Surge in Profits in Motor Trader Top 200 Report." So this is the big annual report from Motor Trader, really rounding up the biggest franchise dealer groups by turnover and ranking them in their annual top 200. So it does show a sector in remarkably rude health. I thought that. I mean, that was one of my takeaways from it. So over the past 12 months, it's looked at the year ends, and the combined turnover for the Motor Trader Top 200. So if you combine it and compare it year on year, the turnover is actually up 18% to 75.1 billion, which is, as they point out, that's almost back to the pre-pandemic turnover figure of 2019, which was 76.6 billion. So nearly there.
Yeah, no, as you say, some fantastic figures there, and they talk there obviously between the biggest hit on of the lockdown in 2020 and 2021 was the new car sales, which we know were down from 2.31 million in 2019 to 1.63 million in 2020, and then 1.65 million in 2021, and the site here that even in 2022 there was no real improvement. Obviously, we know the figures were just over that 1.6 million to 1.61 in terms of that new car registrations. But obviously, in the current year of 2023, they do talk around that stronger recovery. We've been talking about that with Derren and others on the show around this recovery of productivity now starting to return, and vehicles starting to come back into the new vehicle market. But it's going to be interesting to see what that does to turnover and profitability of the dealers now we're getting back to volume throughput with some of this marketplace.
Yeah, and I mean, it really is a great piece of research, and obviously from my Motor Trader days, it formed a big part of what we did on the publication. And I was particularly interested to see the number of groups now with turnovers in excess of £1 billion. So the top 16 groups all have turnovers greater than 1 billion. And that ranges from Motors Group, who are positioned at number 16 with 1.1 billion, to the first place Sytner Group at 5.8 billion pounds. There's some big figures for you, Phil.
some big numbers there. Have you got a top 10 there? Is it, or what's in there?
I have got a top 10. So number 10 is Inchcape Retail at 1.3 billion. Number 9, Jardine Motors at 1.6 billion. Number 8, Truss Ford, 1.8 billion. Number 7, Group 1 at 1.9 billion. Number 6, Marshall Motor Group at 3 billion. And into the top 5 with Virtue Motors at 3.6 billion. Number 4, Pendragon at 3.62 billion. Number 3, Lookers, 4.3 billion. Number 2, Arnold Clark, 4.7 billion. And as I said, Sytner at number 1 with 5.8 billion.
So you can, I mean, the report is available. So do head over to the motortrader.com website where we've taken the story from, and we might be able to share the link on the newsletter on Tuesday morning with that. But do have a look at it, because it is always interesting when you start to see where these dealers are placed in terms of those top 200 dealers. So moving over to AM Online now, and as you sort of cited earlier, this is come from the testing day where some people were just spending the day in the sun driving around in cars. But this is out of the so buyer incentives are vital for UK to reach EV target, and this has come from Mike Hawes, the boss of the SMMT. Now, this is kind of thing that we've sort of touched on numerous times, haven't we, over the months, that for this transition to happen towards electrification, we need to get these consumers not just buying battery electric vehicles because of the benefit in kind, is really get this happening in bigger volume. And I think Mike Hawes does cite where he's shouting for more support for this transition to electrification.
He is, yeah. And Mike was actually hosted a press conference at the event. So there was an element of real work going on there, Phil. And a couple of interesting things came out of the presentation that's reported by AM, that the sheer number of electric vehicle models available on the new car market has risen from just 20 5 years ago to over 110 today. So that is massive growth. And as you say, the call is now for incentives to get those cars out into the market and being bought both on the new side and the used side. So it's obviously the SMMT is campaigning for this, but he does point out that the government's zero emission vehicle mandate, which comes into force January next year, demands 22% of all new cars sold and 10% of new vans. So let's not forget vans as well need to be pure electric at a time when consumers' budgets are obviously being squeezed by inflationary effects, cost of living effects. So there's a lot that still needs to be done to incentivize and to boost the electric side of the vehicle market.
You're right. There's a lot to do with the infrastructure. There's a lot to do with that roadside charging, and we know all that. But we've got to get. We've talked about it. I've shared output from the Vehicle Remarketing Association. We've put calls into the UK government that if you look at the volume growth of battery electric vehicles, a lot of it is from the benefit in kind advantage for company car drivers and not the general retail consumer. And when it comes to used cars, which we talk about the Derren interview in terms of valuations, it's a supply and demand, and that's the sort of shout out that we've got to start to give there and get support on. But again, it's great to have someone like the SMMT now getting behind that and talking to the government and sort of citing that, if we're going to do it and we're going to do it at the pace in which the UK government need it to be done, then it does need a lot more support and incentives to make that happen.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on Motor Trade Radio, powered by eBay Motors Group. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand wherever you are on your podcast feed.
And Derren, looking at the individual vehicle sectors, which ones stood out in terms of rises and falls over the course of May?
So with regards to risers, there weren't many. Convertibles have gone up slightly, coupe cabriolet, so the hard tops have gone up slightly as well. Apart from that, generally the sectors are all quite similar to each other, with the slight exception of upper medium. So D sector cars have only dropped by 0.8%. So that's actually the strongest mainstream sector. Everything else is sort of between 1.3, 1.5, lower medium 1.6% down. So there isn't anything massively untoward there. I think with those upper medium cars, there's less of them produced now, and they look quite good value against SUVs. So that could be why they've not dropped quite as much as others. So, but relatively, with regards to sector, it's fairly sort of uniform across the piece, really.
And before we look at EVs, any observations on how petrol and diesel values fared over the course of the month?
Yeah, they're both quite strong, really. I would say petrol dropped by 1%, diesel by 1.1%. Still definitely a market for diesel, despite it being not so popular, obviously, in the new car market, but and possibly because of that, they're in the used car market, there's less of them around now, starting to see declines in the volumes, and they've still got a place depending on where you live. If you live in central London, you're probably not going to go for one. If you live in North Wales, you probably are. So there's definitely a place for diesel still, and petrol and diesel values have been. I mean, we're talking very much on averages there, but they have been relatively strong.
Yeah.
And we can't have you on without talking about the topic of the moment around EVs. And I know that Chris Plum was on the BVLA webinar this week, sharing his sort of views on what's happening around battery electric vehicles currently. But on the whole, in your editorial, it talks about values down for the 9th month in a row. This time down 4.1%, equivalent to £850 in monetary values. How are brand model specifics, drops taking place now? Because it's not all battery electric vehicles are going down, is it? There's a lot more volatility now by make, model, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's a commonly used term that we use a lot between us, Phil, isn't it? The devil's in the detail, but it is very much that you've got to look at the different models for electric vehicles now. So things like the Model 3, Tesla Model 3, we dropped it early in the month. We've actually reversed that drop later in the month. That's the joy of Cat Live, that you get a little bit of weakness early on, and then it's been stronger, and that car's dropped down to a very reasonable price now, and there's opportunities there for retailers to buy, and consumers who are potentially looking at EVs, maybe going for something a little bit lower than that, and realizing that they can add a little bit to their monthly payment and come out with an aspirational vehicle like a Model 3. Model Y also remained level, but then it's quite interesting with Tesla because the Models S and X both dropped by 3%, and that's despite sort of confirmation that there are no more right-hand drive variants of those orderable in the new car market. So you maybe could have expected that they might have had a little bit of an uptick, and they still might, because you can't get one, or you can't get a right-hand drive new. So they might have a little bit of a recovery as well. We put the Polestar 2 long range up. The Nissan Ariya has been level. Mini Cooper Electric has been level. So there's some stabilisation there, and a little bit of sort of increased interest in them from some of the dealers. But that's the positive. But on the downside, there's some pressure, certainly on those cars that sit underneath the Model 3, that maybe the gap isn't wide enough now. So we've got Peugeot 208 down 9%, or £1,000. Corsa electrics come down 8%, which is about £850. Volkswagen up 8% or £800. So these are big drops in a month, and 8-9% are very unusual in sort of more normal times. So the EV market is kind of realigning. You've got things like Skoda Enyaq that previously was £2,000 below the Model 3 at 1 year old. It's now £14,000 above a Model 3 at 1 year old. So there still needs to be some realignment around that EV market and what people are prepared to pay. So you can also look at it as a positive that 4.1% drop is the lowest drop on EVs this year, but it is still substantial on average. And as I say, there's a number of cars within there that have moved sort of differently to each other, but there's definitely some pressure on that sort of lower end.
Well, as always, I mean, that's only a snippet from the complete interview that we shared on Friday of this week on Derren Martin's monthly update of the used vehicle trade value market. But, you know, how many times do we say it, Curtis? Devil's in the detail, and as ever it is. But the bit that I found interesting, I don't know what you thought, but that when he talks around the battery electric vehicle market and how the Tesla 3 had dropped value in the first week and days of the month, and then recovered in the back end of the month. And that's where you're starting to see some of this supply and demand volatility start to play out, and then sometimes within the same month as well.
Yeah, definitely. And he does make a perfectly valid point that, okay, values were down 1.2% in May, but cars traditionally did devalue. So we're sort of heading into a sort of period of normality. This is what it was like before the pandemic, before the lockdowns.
Yeah, and he makes a point within the interview there, you know, you forget that the values went up by 30%, and then, you know, we see 1.2% drop as negative, and values are dropping sensational, whereas really it's just normal depreciation of a used product that depreciates. That's kind of where we need to be. So fascinating chat with Derren. Then say, as always, do head over to your podcast feed. It was published on Friday of this week for the full interview there with Derren, and check out the editorial that they publish as well, along that, which shows a lot of the detail. Now, sticking with Tesla, the conversation of Tesla, and this hit the headlines very quickly this week, Curtis, didn't it? I know I did share this one, and it was picked up in the Financial Times across many others. Was a Twitter chat, and I know. I'm not sure what it's Twitter chat or whatever it is. I know it failed this week, didn't it?
It failed spectacularly, didn't it, with the DeSantis interview that Elon Musk did at the beginning of the week. But this was kind of the follow-up, wasn't it?
It was.
And you listened to it.
It was fascinating. And I shared my comments on it. And this was a chat between Jim Farley, who's the CEO of Ford, and Elon Musk, and this is on the back of an agreement between the two manufacturers and two CEOs for Tesla to open up their fast charging network across the US and Canada in 2024 to Ford EV product. Now, it's great because that's been talked about. I know it's been tested in places like France and things like this, and there's always been this debate and discussion around Tesla opening up their charging network, and you know, Tesla owners don't necessarily like that, do they, Curtis? In the UK,
they don't.
No, as we talked about when they turn up and there's a little Vauxhall Corsa parked on their Tesla charger.
Yeah, Tesla users aren't used to seeing queues.
They're not, no. But this is about 12,000 fast chargers across the US and Canada, and this will double the current charging facility for Ford. Now, the interesting bit around this, and the bit that I found fascinating, is not just the collaboration between the two manufacturers that, you know, Elon was stating. This isn't about Tesla. This is about sustainability and that whole transition to electrification and sustainable transport network. But actually, what they are doing is open up the API to Ford as well, which will then allow the Ford EV app to access the Tesla fast charging network information, which is fairly unique in a way. So it isn't just normally turn up and it's just an open network. They are actually opening up their API. Now, let's not kid ourselves. Elon will do very well out of this deal, because every new battery electric vehicle sold by Ford, potentially Elon will have some commercial benefit because they'll be using his charging network, and that comes with a cost back to Tesla.
Yeah.
But it's a fascinating story and a fascinating interview and chat between them both.
And I think you're right, Phil. The interesting thing about this story is the opening up of the technology of Ford owners being able to use the Tesla technology within their apps, because that potentially could be a game changer. So when you shared this with me, I was quite surprised, because they're not two brands that you would think would sit comfortably together. And they are in many ways odd bedfellows. Jim Farley and Elon Musk. They have very, very different approaches, but it's a marriage of convenience which could benefit both parties very, very well.
Yeah, no, and again, if you're into that kind of thing, then do watch or listen. It is it's on YouTube, so it is visual, but it is an audio recording of Jim talking with Elon. It's me best friends, Jim and Elon.
Yeah, first name terms with both of them.
Exactly.
Yes, yeah.
But some of the people in the there is questions with it, because it is a Q&A, and they asked they talk about his Roadster that's out in space. Curtis, if you remember that.
Oh,
one,
yes,
right?
yeah.
Still out there.
That's cropped up a few million miles, isn't it?
Well, according to Elon, there's an actual website for it, so you can actually access a website. I can't remember. I think it's TeslaRoadster.com, or I don't know, it's something. I don't know what it is.
You've never been on there, have
I've
you,
not
Phil?
been on there yet, no. But it actually shows you where the Roadster is, because he was being asked when the Roadster's going to become a production vehicle available to the market as well. So it's about a 45 minute long chat between Elon and Jim. But I would urge you to check that out on YouTube, or we'll share the link again within our newsletter feed there. But do check that out, because it's a fascinating chat between the two leaders there.
And staying with your friend Elon, if we head over
my buddy.
head over to the Times. This headline really caught my eye, but I think it may have been slightly blown out of proportion. But the headline is: Elon Musk hints at new Tesla Gigafactory in England. So this story broke on Wednesday, and the source for the story is some comments in the Wall Street Journal, which was picked up by the Times. So according to the story, Elon Musk said on Tuesday that Tesla will make decisions about future manufacturing sites over the coming months. And he actually said, we are not currently looking at new locations, but we will probably towards the end of this year be looking at them. And when he was asked about the prospect of Tesla establishing a site in the UK, Elon Musk said he would strongly consider England as a future gigafactory location. So that's actually all we've got to go on. But if Elon Musk is strongly considering something, then sometimes that does actually happen.
Well,
you
as I
don't
say,
know.
you send the
Could
car
go
to
either
space.
way.
So you never know with these things, do you? So again, many might say that it is purely a news story and nothing more than that. But sometimes these do come to fruition, they do happen, and you never know. But it'd be great. And he's done it. He's got places across Europe that he's built, and he's definitely needing that infrastructure to support the volume for his aspiration for Tesla. So you never know what will happen.
I was surprised when I saw that particular headline, bearing in mind that Elon Musk had been in France the previous week, meeting up with President Macron. Now, you don't get to sit down with the president of France unless there's a deal going down. So whether it's France and or England. Who knows?
Who
I
knows
mean,
with these?
let's wait and see.
No, definitely. And just heading over to our final story, segueing in very nicely here, that covering the story on the BBC News website. This is that Jaguar Land Rover owner to pick UK over Spain for giant car battery plant. Now, I think, am I correct that this is the facility that was initially cited for Rivian? Was it that was muted out there in the market? That this was the site that Rivian was going to do.
You could be right, because it's based in Somerset, if that's where the original Rivian plant was due to be.
Yeah, I think it was. So I mean, again, this is a story that we've covered a couple of times on the podcast, because they were considering between the UK and Spain for building their battery factory, and I think they were obviously. I think there was a story a while ago that they were asking the UK government, was it for 500 million support to build it? I think we talked about it on the podcast, Curtis. So
we did indeed, yeah. And only last week we were talking about Chancellor Jeremy Hunt saying, watch this space, when he was quizzed about overseas investment coming into the UK for a gigafactory. So it's not a done deal, but the fact that it was hit the press this week does rather suggest that it's been possibly leaked from the government, dare I say?
Of course, you said that, Curtis, not me. But, yeah.
but because it's a good, positive story, and who knows? By the time we go out on Saturday, this may have actually been confirmed. Let's hope that is the case.
It does scream that if it, and again, do correct me if it wasn't Rivian, but that place, you've got Rivian, and then Tata looking at it. What if this one doesn't go through? Then maybe Elon is sat in the background there, ready to take it on if it doesn't go through with JLR and Tata. So I think these things are clear. There is a clear aspiration there from the UK government to support this. This site, obviously, that this will create. Not only the required infrastructure for UK development of batteries for supporting UK production of battery electric vehicles, which gets around some of this rules of origin challenges and the tariff discussion that we had recently. But it also creates 9,000 potential for 9,000 jobs, I think, and that whole supply chain infrastructure that will surround that if this does go through. So hopefully this is not just UK government noise, that this is actual deal that will go through, because it would be a fantastic headline and news for the UK automotive sector, particularly around battery electric vehicles.
Yep. So hopefully we'll have an update on that next week.
That's it for this week. So again, have a listen to the full interview there with Derren Martin from Cap HPI. Check out the editorial as well for more detail. And Phill Jones from eBay Motors Group there, giving a headline snippet of some of the data that's in their report due out on the eBay Motors website. So do check that out as well with more detail. And it is a very detailed report. But I think we've covered everything there, Curtis, and all whilst you've been playing around with cars this week as well. So there's been a lot going on. But hopefully everyone's going to have a enjoyable bank holiday weekend with the weather that's been forecast as well.
Yep. Have you got any plans?
No, I don't do anywhere. I don't go anywhere, Curtis. I don't
You'll be in the office poring over data, won't you?
I'm not over 25. I don't get to go to these events.
Well,
so that's it.
Enough of this frivolity. That's all for now. Many thanks for joining us on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
You've been listening to Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group. We'll be sharing all the links from this week's headlines on Monday morning. So to make sure you receive them, just subscribe to the free newsletter on our LinkedIn page. Just search Motor Trade Radio Podcast.